Welcome to Free Media. I'm Robby Soave, and I'm again joined by my friend Andrew Heaton, a colleague at Reason Magazine. Thank you for being here.
Delighted to be here.
Let's get to it. Former Marine Daniel Penny was acquitted of criminally negligent homicide of a homeless man, Jordan Neely, on Monday, whom Penny had held in a chokehold for 6 minutes in May of 2023.
Morning Joe host Joe Scarborough blasted progressives for passing laws that he said enable homelessness and a national mental health crisis. Let's watch.
Mika, the mental health system in this country, again, is just grossly insufficient. Whether you're talking about New York, whether you're talking about Florida, whether you're talking about California, you have people walking around on the streets that have mental health issues. And the fact that some progressives have said basically, oh, well, we're just, let's pass laws that allow homelessness. You look at San Francisco, you look at Los Angeles, as we've said all along, and Rev and I have said all along, there's nothing compassionate about that.
No.
There's nothing progressive about that, leaving people with mental health problems on the street. No, we need to spend more money as a society.
So I don't often say this, but I did sort of agree with the thrust of what Morning Joe was getting at there. Again, not a usual position I find myself in. No one is happy with the semi-epidemic, quasi-epidemic. I don't like to describe things in exaggerated epidemic terms, but mentally ill, drug-addicted people on the streets of major cities who are a danger to themselves and in some cases a danger to others, and nobody's comfortable with it. It doesn't feel humane to just let them flail in discomfort and filth in the streets. So I think there is a desire to present solutions. That doesn't mean to be prison or anything like that, but some kind of, we spend a tremendous amount of money providing these resources. So that is maybe a little bit of fact check. These resources are provided, they were provided to Jordan Neely. He, as part of a plea arrangement, was given housing. But the problem is if you just give housing to mentally ill and drug addicted people, as anyone who's lived in an apartment building in DC where these people get free housing, they don't stay in it until the mental illness and the drug addiction is dealt with. So you can't just throw housing at homeless people. In the vast majority of cases, it just does not work. They will not stay there.
I'll add to that you can allocate money for housing a lot of the time and not build it. Los Angeles has like $6 billion or something like that that's allocated for homeless shelters right now, and every time they try to build anything, any neighborhood they put it in goes, hold on a minute.
Oh, lovely.
Our neighborhood has specific aesthetic, and Los Angeles is hideous. It's an ugly city. Anybody that tells you that there's some aesthetic beauty to it is lying to you. They're trying to keep their home ownership.
Sure.
I think that Joe's got a really good point here. I am very much concerned about homelessness, and I'm concerned about people that are on the street in a really bad situation like that. And the two big things that I would do are deregulate housing, because that's artificially driving up the scarcity of housing, and then people that are on the edge end up getting homeless. And the other thing I'd do is I would put more federal resources towards mental health. Oklahoma, where I'm from, the largest provider of mental health in the state is the prison, because we got rid of the asylums, and everybody that would otherwise be in the asylums is now in the prison system.
Big
so
mistake.
I think he's got a good point with that. But one of the other things too there is like a lot of the homelessness, the best thing you could do is just letting people build more houses to bring the cost down.
Absolutely. What do you think about the actual case, which we haven't addressed yet on Free Media? I was a little bit conflicted on this case. I don't think it's as clear-cut an example as, for instance, Kyle Rittenhouse, who I was very much persuaded of his innocence, of how he had reacted in the moment was befitting the situation. I'm not with the people on the right who are like, oh, he's a hero, and we want to see more of this every day. At the same time, Jordan Neely was a mentally ill person who was threatening people on that subway car, who had a long history of violent interactions with people. And I understand the defense's point of view that he clearly choked him longer than he should have, and that was maybe a contributing factor or maybe the causal factor in his death, but the police showed up and he was still breathing and did not provide the kind of assistance to him because they viewed him as possibly disease-ridden and filthy, and they didn't want to do anything about it. And when you put all of those things together, I can't say how I would have ruled as a jury member. I found myself thinking that acquittal was probably the correct course of action. So I was reasonably on board with the outcome.
I don't know all the ins and outs of this, but it sounds like you're more familiar with it than me. So the guy put the homeless guy in a chokehold.
Yes.
And he was breathing when he left. Did his windpipe
when
collapse? What happened exactly?
When the police arrived. I mean, he was on significant amounts of drugs at the time. So there's a debate. Now, the coroner said, no, it was the choking. The defense then presented a different witness and said, no, it's not the choking. That's how all these trials go, right? The prosecution brings their medical experts who say this. Defense brings their medical experts that say this. But if it's not clear cut, you should acquit the person, right? It has to be overwhelming evidence of guilt. And if you compare it to like the George Floyd situation where, it's the police, so they should be trained to handle this situation correctly, and there was no need to keep pinning them and to be kneeling on his back for that long, because they had the police car right there, they had the handcuffs, they had him, the threat was neutralized, they could have easily put him in the car. This we're talking about a civilian, albeit someone with military training, on a subway car before the police arrived, who has threatened people on the car. I mean, it's an explosive and difficult situation, and I don't begrudge people for having differing point of views on it, but for my money, that was the outcome I was kind of thinking was appropriate.
Yeah,
I don't want to see a wave of vigilantism in response to it. I want to see a wave of dealing with the mental health problems of homeless people on subway cars.
Yeah, I concur. When I don't know the details about a case, I tend to default on what the jury came up with because they've seen the details and I have not. So until I hear otherwise, I'll support the jury's decision on that particular one. But I share your basic premise. I lived in New York City and I lived in LA briefly, and both of them were really sad.
Yeah.
There was a time when I was walking up the stairs in New York City and there was a guy his pants were around his ankles. He'd clearly defecated himself. Yeah. He was shaking and he was gibbering. And I thought, like, if I am ever in that situation, I would want somebody to give me medication against my will. There's a lot of people like that I don't think can think their way out of it or just buck up or anything like that. And I would want to focus on what we could do for them.
Right, and turning over the public spaces in our society, the parks, et cetera, things where we've decided these are public access spaces, and just having it be the situation where there's mentally ill, suffering people there ruins the space for everyone, and including for them, because as you point out, they don't want to be in that situation. So,
can I ask you something?
Yes.
I was in this city called San Francisco about a year ago.
I might have heard of it.
Yeah, and there were a ton of people on heroin. And they all did this thing where they were kind of standing, but they were like slumped over.
I've
it was
seen
this
that.
very
That's
specific
the heroin
posture.
stance. Yep.
And but from what I can tell, a lot of the stuff they would have done is stuff I would have done in terms of drug policy, of decriminalizing it, trying to treat it like a medical problem, where we've got people on staff that can help you with an overdose. Are we wrong? Did they overshoot? Does this disprove our whole thing?
I don't think so. Maybe it's a challenge. I like the idea of having safe injection site places, not in the public common area, in the street, in the park, but somewhere else you can go and you can partake in those kinds of things. Because really there are people, even today, there are people who use these drugs safely and it doesn't screw up their entire life.
Yeah, like Switzerland's got like programs like
Yes.
that, right? Where you come in and you do methadone, then you go back to being a social media manager.
Exactly. It should really be the antisocial and criminal and violent aspect of again. Now it's illegal to drive your car, right, under the influence of alcohol or drugs or whatever else. But if you're driving, the goal is to get to responsible driving, right? Not to limit what substances you can put in your body. So if you're engaged in a recklessness, if you're putting other people at risk, yourself at risk in a public space, then I'd say there's a reason to prevent that and do something. If you're just doing it privately and you're causing no harm to anyone else, as most of the people on drugs are, it's not an issue.
That's the greatest Englishman who ever lived, John Stuart Mill, talks about this kind of thing, where he goes look, the problem with drinking is not the drinking. The problem is if you're abusing your wife or failing to take care of your children or causing violence. But at the same time, if you really got into reading and you were no longer feeding your children, that would be a problem. It's not the direct action, it's the secondary orders that affect things.
It's the same thing with gambling, right? The vast majority of people can have a fun night at the casino, not feel any pressure to, throw their wedding ring on the table or something, right? But a couple people struggle with that. There was statistics coming out about the sports betting going on, and there's going to be, that we libertarians are going to fight against this effort to criminalize it based on the massive amount of money they're taking in from a handful of people who are degenerate gamblers. Maybe they got to be prohibited, but to have a broad law prohibit it on everyone, most
but
people.
Not lotteries, because we're okay with state lotteries.
The state can.
Because then we're recycling that money. Then it's like a poor people tax.
When the state preys on
That's fine.
poor.
Yeah.
people,
But here,
then it's fine.
I think there's actually a good midpoint here for libertarians, and I don't know what the other variant would be. I talked to somebody from the Rand Corporation a couple of years ago where they had proposed having a kind of voluntary gambling prohibition for yourself. So when you get a state ID, it would be like a normal one, but you could write to the state and go, I want a blue ID. And that means that I, Andrew Heaton, have said, no, like I'm voluntarily removing my ability to gamble for a minimum of 6 months. And I can reverse this if I want in 6 months, but it does stop me from having, I'm basically my own check for impulses. But nobody's making you do it. You opt into the system, and then it creates a speed bump. I like that kind of thing.
That's a great idea. Whenever there are people suffering from a problem, like some kind of addiction thing, I'm like, well, can we solve it for just, can we concentrate on those
Focus
people
on
instead of everyone who does this in a law-abiding, healthy way, whether it's alcohol, guns, tobacco, gambling, etc. I like that approach.
Yeah.
Very much. All right, stick around. We'll be back with more free media right after this.